Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Alex Hayes Podcast. I am your host, Alex Hayes. With me today is my special guest, Robert Bortins. He is the CEO of Classical Conversations. He's second generation entrepreneur, husband, father of three. He is a fantastic person. He is out there in the community sharing the message of homeschooling and protecting family values. And I am just so grateful. And actually, today is his birthday. So I'm going to say happy birthday live right now before I forget. So, Robert, thanks so much for being here today.
Alex, thanks for having me, and just super excited to talk about generational wealth and generation passing on and what that maybe truly means and how you can just do a good job preparing the next generation to keep going forward with what you started. And yeah, just hopefully give some lessons that I've learned and seen other people learn as well today.
Awesome. No, I'm super excited about this. So, Robert's story is very interesting because he is, like we said, he's second generation business owner. His mother actually started Classical Conversation. I'll have you tell the story best here, Robert. Take us back to those super early days. Where did Classical Conversations start?
Yeah, so I was homeschooled through high school, and that might be a lot more common now, but 25 years ago, that was not as common. And my mom was involved in the homeschooling community, creating sports teams and helping to run co-ops and all of the different things that a parent loving their kid would want to do. And as I got into high school, a lot of my friends who are committed homeschoolers, they weren't going to continue to do it. How are you going to get into college? Now colleges actively recruit homeschoolers. Back then, there was universities that wouldn't even let you in with a perfect SAT score if you were homeschooled. How are you going to teach chemistry and biology and these higher math subjects and languages? And so there's all this uncertainty, and my mom kind of was an entrepreneur all her life. Growing up, she was always, trying some business idea or selling something out of our home, and we were involved in that. And she said, "Well, maybe I'll try to create a program to help people homeschool through high school." She had kind of seen being involved in other co-ops things that worked and didn't work, and so she wanted to have a kind of a structured, rigid program so that people could build off that, but that we would be able to come together on a weekly basis and have conversations, dissect frogs, do debate, discuss history papers, things like that. And so she put an advertisement in a homeschool newsletter, which there wasn't a whole lot of emails going on back then, so it was a physical newsletter that got sent out. And 10 other families joined us that first year in 1997 in our basement, where what we would call Challenge One today, or for those who aren't familiar with the CC vernacular, that'd be your freshman year program. So there was 11 of us. Everyone loved it, wanted to do a second year. They had younger siblings or friends that wanted to get involved. So my mom took her syllabus, which is about 16 pages that was stapled together per semester, and gave that to another mom and was writing the curriculum, basically, 3-4 weeks ahead of where we were, using a classical methodology, which she had kind of recently discovered and was trying to implement. And yeah, it's just kept taking off from there. The third year ended up being my senior year. I graduated a year early. There was 3 or 4 groups going on, and I was a teenage boy, so I wasn't like paying that close attention to it, but I just knew it was cool to homeschool in this kind of manner, and I was learning a lot and having a lot of fun. And there was accountability aspect of it that was a little bit more difficult to achieve if you're homeschooling alone. And went to Clemson University to pursue industrial engineering degree. I'm the oldest of 4 boys, and so my brother and I are about 18 months apart. But then there's a 12-year gap, and I have brothers that are 12 and 15 years younger than me. And so as I was, going to college, they were getting older, and parents were wanting things for that age group. So my mom started writing what we call our foundations program, which is our kindergarten through 6th grade program. She had the high school program basically finished at that point, although we're always iterating and making it better over the last 30 years. I'm at college studying industrial engineering. I was very involved in a lot of things growing up. We could talk about that in a minute. But that was when I got the phone call from my mom my sophomore year that my dad had quit his job, and he was an aerospace engineer making good money, and that he was going to help homeschool my youngest brothers, and that she was going to see if she could make classical conversations a real business. At that point, there was, maybe a dozen groups going and about 300 people on waiting lists, people driving 2, 3 hours to go to one of these high school communities. And she said, good luck paying for college because we're not helping you out anymore. We love you and God bless. And so I had just paid for that semester's tuition, so they had helped me through that. But I immediately went to the co-op office, and as an engineer, a lot of people do co-ops, which is basically you work a semester and go to school semester. You do that for experience. I did it because that was the only way I was going to be able to finish college. Every once in a while, my mom would call me and say, "Hey, can I have some money to buy books? I'll give it back to you in a month or two with 10% interest on top or something like that." And I'd always tell her, "Mom, I'm supposed to be calling you for money, not the
Right.
other way around, because I'm a broke college student." But God blessed me. My resume was really strong compared to the other applicants, and I actually earned or was awarded the highest paid co-op job that they had, which actually gave me, I did take on some student loan debt, but very minimal student loan debt, and was able to graduate from college. Took me 5.5 years to graduate, but I actually only spent 7 semesters in school. So I graduated a semester faster than most people would, because I just took so many hours each time I was actually at school because I needed to get it over with. And so yeah, I did that. People always said, "Did you always know you were going to be CEO of Classical Conversations?" The answer is no, because my mom was still calling me for money when I graduated, and I worked as an industrial engineer for a couple Fortune 50 companies, as well as a small manufacturing company. And so, for about 6 years after I graduated, I was doing that. During that time, Classical Conversations started to grow or continued to grow into more substantial numbers. Started helping out like on the side with some marketing, as well as with one of our smaller business units, just kind of learning the business nights and weekends while I was doing my engineering job. And then like I said, about 2012 or so, 2013 is when I came on board to work full time with her and spend some time transitioning in order to take over those day to day roles, because those two younger brothers were now in middle school and high school. My mom had spent their formative years traveling 30, 40 weeks a year to grow Classical Conversations. And she wanted to be able to spend some time with them more intentionally as they were going into high school and going off. So that's kind of the short story, or maybe the medium story of
Yeah.
how I became CEO of Classical Conversations.
That's quite a Genesis story for sure. There's a lot to unpack there. So let's go back first. When you started with the 10 families in the basement, what what did you think of that? Like what was your initial reaction to your mom saying, "Well, we're going to homeschool now. We're going to have a bunch of strangers in the basement and we're going to all learn together." What was that like?
Yeah, luckily I did know some of them beforehand, but not all of them. I really enjoyed being homeschooled. I'm not going to pretend 100% of kids enjoy being homeschooled, although I think a lot of them appreciate it, especially once they become adults, that sacrifice and opportunity they were given. But yeah, it was interesting. It was fun. I mean, there was, Latin is one of the things that we teach at Classical Conversations, and I was not someone who was enthusiastically learning about that. But being able to do kind of the science experience merits and the math and doing things like debate were things that I really enjoyed doing, and just having that conversational aspect and getting into the weeds, arguing with different people who generally shared similar worldviews. Most of us were in churches or had parents that love the Lord, but not each of us individually necessarily in the community. And so it was really cool from kind of being homeschooled alone. Not that I mean, we were involved in so much stuff. I don't want to get the idea that we were inside very often, but to have other people kind of reading the same books and doing the same things and trying to figure out this, it was just a really cool experience. And so I always tell people if classical conversations didn't exist, I would be homeschooling my own kids. But now I have the privilege of leading the organization, and I'm just having the opportunity to try to take it to another step forward and just serving families, not just here in the US, but now abroad as well.
For sure. And do you remember when your mom was trying to get this started? What were some of those early struggles that you saw her go through, and how did that impact you?
Yeah, I mean, I think I saw a lot of iterations of curriculum development and writing and figuring out what worked and didn't work. And, back then, changing assignments, maybe the same week that we were giving them and getting immediate feedback, from the other students and from their parents and having that conversation just really showed the importance of just, knowing your product, talking to your customers, those first customers, creating those evangelical customers that are going to go tell their friends about it and get them to come buy your product by just kind of trying to build that relationship and that community with them. So that's probably things, everyone's trying to build a community online now. There wasn't online communities when we get started. So it was really flesh to flesh, eye to eye community, picking up the telephone and having conversations with your customers. Oh, this is working, this isn't working. What are you seeing at home? How could we make this better? So really being iterative in that process. Trusting in the Lord that first night, where she had her first what we called information meeting, where she's, is trying to get people to come to our house to learn about what now is classical conversations. She actually put in this newsletter that the meeting was going to start at 6:30, but she thought it said 6. And so, 6 o'clock rolled around and no one showed up. And, 6:15, still no one's there, 6:20. So, classical conversations almost didn't get started until at 6:30 she was, ready to give up. And that's when everyone came because that's when she told them to come. So, you never know, how that's gonna work out. And, one of the things that was, new at the time was, everyone wanted to do things for free. And she said, "Well, if I'm going to commit to doing this and doing this hard work, I want people to pay." And, it's not a whole lot of money. It was about, I think, $500 or $600 per semester or something at that time. She knew that if you had skin in the game, that the parents would take it more seriously, the students would take it more seriously. I think by the 3rd year, we were actually had one of the students who was a senior was paying for it himself because his parents couldn't afford it that year, but he saw the importance of it, and so he, like, worked that summer to be able to pay his tuition bill. That really, hard work, you know, is important, and you don't necessarily know your idea is gonna be good. And like I said, my mom was always trying different business ideas throughout the years, but, homeschooling was something she was passionate about, and that was probably one of the reasons that, she was able to make it successful.
That's amazing. And so this was before AI, right? So I mean, she's writing curriculum by hand. This is not like it is today, where you put it in the GPT and it says, "Spit me out this," right? Like, no, like she's writing this stuff by hand, and that must have been a
Yeah.
ton of work. What were some of those conversations like that you had with your mom as you're building, as she's building this curriculum for you? Which means she's solving her own problem, right? So she has a
Yeah.
problem. Problem is, she wants to make sure that and your brother were educated, right? In high school at appropriate levels. And so she's taking that initiative and she's doing that. But what were those conversations like as she's writing your curriculum? And like, was there a back and forth? Were you telling her what to put in there, or was she just basically kind of using you as the guinea pig?
Yeah, no, I mean, it was mostly me as a guinea pig trying to figure things out. I mean, children need to be told what to do because they don't necessarily have the wisdom to make good choices or even know what choices to make. I was able. There's always been homeschool conventions that I've been going to since well before classical conversations got started. So, being able to go, work those booths with her, have conversations, with potential families that might want to join us. So I was able to pick one book out that was in there. There's some things that were in the curriculum back then, like computer programming, that we since have removed, and just trying some different things at that time because we didn't have all the experiences that we had now. I mean, now we've helped millions of families homeschool, through high school in some form or fashion, and we've got all that experience and feedback, going into the curriculum, and got, dozens of curriculum designers and stuff like that who are homeschool parents who've graduated their kids. So, it's much different today than back then. There was a good group of students. And so she would definitely, have conversations with us, what worked this past semester, what didn't work, what would you like to see differently, or even like on a weekly basis, what are you struggling with? How can we best use this time that we have together? So I think that was, all interesting things that were going on. At the same time, I was working as an engineer. That's one of the beauties about homeschooling is I knew I come from a long line of engineers on both sides of my family. And so I thought I wanted to be a computer engineer, which is why I taught, we had a programming class a couple of semesters at Classical Conversations back in the late 90s. But part of that, because I was homeschooled during the school year, I was actually working one full day a week. So I was working 9 to 5 one day a week at that job, working full time during the summer, and I was able to learn that I didn't want to be a computer engineer, but I did want to be an engineer. I just didn't want to be a programmer because there was a lot of sitting behind desks and if then, what if statements back then. I'm sure that's changed, but it was not, and that was a small company, about 12 employees, about four of them were owners. They had one year where they were kinda struggling financially, and, I knew the owners were missing paychecks to make sure all the other employees were getting, and, we didn't necessarily have any employees at Classical Conversations at that time. My dad was still working, he was an aerospace engineer, so he was making, upper middle class money, back then, so it wasn't like we were for want. My mom was spending a lot of time writing curriculum. My my brother and I, who are on the older end, were involved in a lot of sports and extra activities, and then my younger brothers weren't in school yet, so it gave my mom kind of a little sweet spot to be able to do a lot of writing and things like that on the go. And at that time, she didn't have like her guide was the thing that she was mainly writing. She hadn't written any of her own books yet. That would come later as she saw, what books serviced the homeschool community well, and what books really needed to be written by homeschoolers for homeschoolers.
I think one of the most underappreciated or underestimated segments in our population is homeschool moms.
That was one of the things I did in, it was right before COVID in 2019. I saw these homeschooling moms who had just kind of graduated these kids. You know, kids are getting full rides, perfect scores or near perfect scores on these, college entrance exams, and then they would go work at the library for minimum wage or go work at their church for minimum wage. And not that those things are bad by any means, but you had these homeschooling moms who literally are probably like the smartest people on the planet. They've just spent like 12 years or more raising a generation of kids, teaching them Latin and chemistry and, discussing Homer and Plato. But they have this huge gap, right, in their resume. And so no one wants to support them. So one of the innovative things that we did was we partnered with a college called Southeastern in Florida, Lakeland, Florida, where our parents can actually go get their master's degree while they're finishing up their homeschooling career. So if they time it right, they can actually, kind of empty nest and get their master's degree that same time. They're reading a lot of the same materials that their students are reading in high school. But like, if we say, hey, read this book about Plato and write a 5-page paper, they're writing a 10-page paper and going more in depth for it. So now we've got we have about 200 students currently in the program or have been through the program getting their master's degree just because of that kind of issue that you just pointed out, that you've got all these homeschooling moms that have kind of dedicated their life to learning, and then like they don't have any of the credentials, as you will, that that they've been doing anything in. It is quite a resource that's underappreciated, and again, just, kind of that entrepreneurial spirit, seeing that there was this need, not necessarily for my families, but for these families that had been working with us. And me knowing that these moms are just like, they should be, leading HR departments in Fortune 500 companies, not helping people check out books at their local library and providing them an avenue to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. My wife has been homeschooling our kids for the last 7 years. As my oldest is now 10. We started when he was 3. And we were in the class, we've been in the classical conversations arena for that entire period. So it's been an incredible journey. But the skills that my wife has picked up through this process is just unbelievable. She's my business partner and we work together every day, but a lot of those really, really valuable skill sets were picked up through the homeschooling curriculum and being organized with the curriculum and having a plan in place and, plan of the day for everybody. Like, just, I'm blown away by the caliber of the skill sets that she has been able to bring into the entrepreneur field from just teaching our kids and making sure that they have had a good education. So 100%. I think homeschool moms, if they were in charge of most public government sectors, I mean, we wouldn't have any problems. Like, everything would be solved very quickly. I'm telling you.
It could probably even improve the Chick-fil-A lines.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, absolutely.
But yeah, the
Absolutely.
DMV would run a much, much smoother if you just put some homeschool moms.
I'm telling you, that's it. That's all we need. Tap into this untapped resource so that we're going to be good as a country.
Yeah.
uh, let's go back a little bit now. Let's turn it back to your transition period. So you've talked about how you went to Clemson. When did the conversation start of bringing you into the classical conversation leadership team? Like, I guess that's the real question is like, when
Yeah.
did it become obvious that that was where this conversation was headed?
Yeah, so I think, like for me personally, you know, because classical conversations wasn't like a foreign business when I got to college, like my plan was always to have a career in engineering and work my way up some corporate ladder. And so, yeah, I was I never actually sent her money and she never sent me money, but we both were just poor separately for my college time. But when I was leaving college, there was about 4,000 students in classical conversations, and that was starting to become more of a financially viable, where it wasn't just like trying to figure out how to pay the bills each month, but they were actually able to pay themselves, a small salary. And so I was not necessarily too focused on what they were doing other than just, watching from afar. And probably about 4 years, so 2009, 2010, about 3, 4 years after I graduated, was when we started having conversations on like what it might look like to join and help her out. At that point, there was maybe 20 employees. I was making decent money as an engineer, so didn't really want to go backwards. I still had some student loans to pay off and things like that. And the other thing is, I wanted to prove to myself, if I was going to be a homeschool advocate, that it'd be helpful to actually have a story of going to college, having a hard major, going through struggles, and climbing a corporate ladder, getting raises, learning from other organizations. And so I felt like that was starting to come to fruition. And then, there's some areas that were seasonal that she needed help with that I could help out from afar. So, Zoom meetings, or I guess GoToMeeting was starting to become a thing, if anyone remembers that. So able to do some more work that was remote. So that was when we used to have a testing service that I was a part of, that marketing and getting the website up. And I did have some little bit of tech skills that I could use to help out the business. So did that for a couple years, and that just kind of gave me a taste for what's going on. Starting to talk to her about different aspects of the business, meeting some of the other leaders. And then in 2012, like I said, kind of the stars aligned. The company I was working for, we were getting a lot of pressure from China at that time because they were basically stole our product and was trying to sell it as their own. I had been there for about 5 years, had been, getting climbing the corporate ladder, if you would. And I'd kind of gotten to a place where I was I'd done what I needed to do as an engineer and was going to need to like kind of reset and take a whole look at the whole production facility and start another like big multi-year project. And at that point, my mom was ready to kind of have me come on board. And so everything just really aligned with like my career being at a place that was a good point for a transition. The company was is in a good spot. And so I spent the first 6 months or so, I was remote because I had to sell the house that I was living in. I was living about 3 hours from where my parents were. So I worked remote, just kind of learning the business. One of the things that I did that year was I enrolled myself into our Foundations and Essentials program. So for those who don't know, I basically was in a what you'd call kind of sixth grade program as a 27-year-old or something at the time. So it was, me and a bunch of 11, 12-year-olds sitting around the classroom because I had experienced 3 years of our high school. I knew what that looked like. I didn't know what our, younger years looked like. I wasn't married, although I was, dating my now wife at that time. So it was an opportunity for me to really like dive in and learn the curriculum, learn what was going on, talk to those local leaders that were running that community and try to learn everything about the business that I could. Once I moved up, we kind of started helping out on day-to-day activities, continuing to kind of work with the marketing team and the CMO at that time, Mary Alfs. And then kind of over, a couple year periods, my mom would, demonstrate how she would do things, give me different tasks. And then once I kind of displayed some proficiency in it, let me run with it for the most part. And then she was, basically took a year and a half, 2 years, and just kind of let me run the business day to day. She continued to work on the curriculum, but she focused more on, like I said, homeschooling my younger brothers. And yeah, so in some aspects, that was a pretty smooth transition at that time. But definitely when she became an empty nester again, got a little rough because she was bored and looking for things to do. So she was trying to get herself back in the business after being kind of out of the day-to-day operations for 6 years. So that was kind of a jolting conversations that had to be had, and that eventually came to a head, and we're now back at a good spot. But yeah, I mean, I don't know that I was prepared necessarily to take over when I did, but I was kind of smart enough to not change anything that I wasn't sure needed to be changed, and to keep things running in the same direction. And I joined, if you haven't heard about it, the C12 group. It's kind of a Christian CEO roundtable that meets once a month to go over curriculum. So I kind of signed up for that like right away because I was like, I know I don't know a lot of things, so I need to find a group of people to mentor me and coach me and teach me, and have made a lot of good friends and still involved in that. I guess almost 12 years later. Yeah, been 12 years. I've been doing that. So I think that went well, and we've definitely had our fights and quibbles and disagreements over the years, and sometimes those conversations went well, and sometimes they took a little bit longer to get everything worked through. But I think just me being passionate about the business already, I think's been helpful, and then just me trying to understand founder's intent, and but also understand what's going on in today's reality has been kind of where you try to listen to what the founder and the principal owner is wanting to do, but also knowing that she hasn't homeschooled any kids for almost 10 years now, and sometimes things change.
I think that's an amazing story. A big problem I hear a lot in the conversations is nobody's ready. Nobody's going to take the business. Nobody wants my business. Nobody could take my business. Nobody's going to care about my business the way I do. I don't have anybody I can pass this off to. Uh, and talk to us about what made you, from your corporate experiences and then having that transition, what was it that about you in particular and your skills that made it successful? Like what made you the right person to be able to take over?
Well, I think part of it, we do a lot of worldview training and classical conversations. That's a big part of our curriculum. And so just through the conversations over the years, whether it's like volunteering on like a Ron Paul presidential campaign or knocking on doors, just having those conversations throughout the years. Why is liberty important? Why is freedom important? Why is the ability to homeschool important? So having that alignment there, but I could still not have the skill set. And so I think, going off and getting a credential from a college, getting a hard degree that shows that I can work hard, that I can dedicate myself, working for some Fortune 50 companies, going through their training programs, seeing how they do things for better or for worse. And, just being able to prove that there's a kind of a third party out there that's validating that I'm a successful human, that I can be responsible for more and more things each year and do projects well and fail on projects. That's probably a nice thing that, there's a couple projects that I really botched, but it was on someone else's dime instead of our own families. So, I mean, it's just part of the nature. I always hit my goals, but, you might do 3 projects in 1 year and 2 go well, and then 1 goes sideways on you or something like that, and you get to learn from that. So, and then just, like, once I took the role, my first instinct was just to do things the same way that my mom would do them, whether I agreed with it or not, until I understood why she was doing it that way, or I could really articulate well, why a different way would be better. So I think from her end, she would say that she'd always agree that my ways were better, but just having the kind of that North Star that we know that we agree on, that we don't always have to agree on the exact pathway to get there. And knowing too that, like, the next generation is gonna make some mistakes, and that's how you learn and that's how you become a leader. One of the hard parts for me though was, like, our executive team where was all my mom's friends, and they probably all knew the struggles, and I'm sure she confided in them all the, silly things that I had done as a teenager or, in college or something like that. So trying to acclimate myself and earn their respect. I tried not to pretend like it was given to me or that I was entitled to that role, but that it was a gift and something that I needed to, prove to myself that I could lead it and that I was doing a good job. And so understanding outside metrics like, what should our net profit be? Uh, what should we be spending on IT for a company our size? And being able to look at other organizations and making sure that, we're falling within reasonable range. So every single year I ask myself, am I still the right person to lead classical conversations, or is there someone better to lead it? Because I want the mission to be fulfilled more than me to have this particular role. Having that kind of lifelong conversation with my mom about the importance of homeschooling, enjoying it myself, proving through college and, my work experience that I can be responsible for more things, and then having that kind of, 2-year transition, and then it wasn't like she was out completely. I'd still go over the books with her, every December, and, have, meetings with her to tell her what we're doing and what we're working on, and that sort of things, so we had things in place that allowed her to gain confidence that, I wasn't running her business into the ground. And then, I mean, not trying to be morbid, but we're all gonna pass on, and so someone's going to want to do what you're doing. One of the sad things that we're seeing in the homeschool marketplace right now is these kind of big secular companies are buying up these homeschool organizations because they didn't raise up another generation to take them over. And so these, strong Christian curriculums are, over a period of time will get watered down, and their customers aren't going to know any different because you're not going to advertise that you sold to some big multi-corporation conglomerate. They're just going to absorb you into their machine. But I think from like a, from a parent perspective, I mean, I have a friend who's about to retire, works for his dad, and his dad still won't retire. And his dad's like 88, and his business is so much his identity. And I think that's something that can be not healthy. I think, another thing that I see is, kids kind of entitled, like, "Oh, I'm gonna run this business because my last name is the same as my mom or dad's." And I don't think that's gonna necessarily create a healthy environment with, like, if the other managers or leaders in the business, don't trust that individual, to make good decisions for them because their paycheck every 2 weeks is riding on them making a good decision. The fact that I was brought in and had some wins early when I was just like working part time on these auxiliary products, and really got to know the products really well by humbling myself and enrolling myself with a bunch of 12-year-olds. And those are all things that I think people can learn from. And one of the things I see on people who kind of do it well is just creating a family kind of rule and guidelines. Things like before you work for the family company, you got to go get another job in the industry or a parallel kind of industry and go work for 2 or 3 years to prove yourself. Or when you come on board, you're not getting a mid-level management job right away just because of your last name, but you're going to start at the bottom or start where it's appropriate. And then you also have to make sure that you give, their manager full permission to fire them.
Yeah,
Like, hey, if little Jimmy's not working out, you can fire him, and there's not going to be any blowback blowback from you because we got to get the job done.
interesting. And would you say that one of the most important factors is making sure you have vision alignment? Was that really, because it sounded like that was a big thing for you, it was like you had a shared vision, even though you said that you were, the path to get to the end result or to the shared vision may have differed in different ways, but there was an alignment on the big picture, on the mission. Was that really could be considered a core pillar of a successful succession transition?
Yeah, I think so. Because if you founded a business, like it's your baby, right? Like, healthy or not, that's how you're going to view it. And you're going to have a certain vision for what you want it to be. You basically, can find someone else to sell it to that has that vision. You can just pass on and something will happen to the business afterwards. Or you can find someone you trust inside your family or a family friend that can run the business, or you can maybe create an ESOP and sell it to your employees or something like that. But any business, if they're without vision, people perish. And I think, getting alignment on that big picture with your leadership team, regardless of their kin or not, is going to be key to that success. Or if I also know like second generation business people who quite frankly, didn't do a good job raising their kids. They're entering retirement age. They kind of regret their decisions that they made, and they're trying to bring their kids in to the business. It's causing conflict, but they're just kind of like, look, I'm going to work 2 more years and give this over to my kid. If he turns this $10 million business into rubble, then that's what he does. If he grows it, that's what he does. If he maintains it, that's what he does. Talking to some of the upper management inside that company. The kid's a good kid. Yeah, I call him kid. He's my age, but he wants to do the right things. He's smart, but some of them are concerned he doesn't have that same skill set his father had. And so, I think it's important to know like you can own a business, but that doesn't give you the right to run the business necessarily if you want to do what's best for everyone. Something will happen. If you don't have a roadmap, you'll get to where you're going, is what I tell people. It just might not be where you expected to go. And so I think like in all of life, you've got to be intentional. And then even if your kid is only middle management material, like he can still own the business, be a middle manager in something that he's good at and passionate about. And as long as there's that alignment on the top, they're still getting the dividends. They're still, reaping the benefits of being a business owner without necessarily running it. And so you can obviously stay on longer. But yeah, most people, I think it's really hard to give up the business they own because you've controlled it. You have all the history. You know why you do this instead of that. You know that the younger generation doesn't because they weren't there when you had to make those hard decisions. Like I said, something's going to happen to your business, and it's just up to you to be like how intentional you're going to be with it. And, are you going to make it look like it's something that's for your family? I think a lot of people don't talk about that family legacy enough and talk about you're not just building something for yourself, but for your prosperity as well. And, if you worked 80 hours a week and you were always mad when you got home, and on the weekends you drank too much and smoked too much because you were stressed out from owning a business, well, it's not surprising that your child doesn't want to take it over, you know? So, making sure that you're the business owner, so you gotta do what you gotta do, but if you make it look miserable, they're not gonna wanna do it. So I think, helping them, having that conversation over a period of time is helpful as well.
I agree with that. And speaking of intentionality, talk to us about that conversation. Who initiated the conversation of you coming in and leading the business? Did your mom reach out to you or did you reach out to her? You said that was a good transition period of your life, but talk to us about that first conversation and all of its possible awkwardness. But like how do you do that? Like, how did your conversation go with your mom? And then what advice would you give to people that maybe are struggling with that same situation?
Yeah, so she reached out to me, again, this was, I'll probably get my years wrong, but right around 2010, 2009, 2010. And, kind of the first step was just helping her out with this little side business that this auxiliary part of the classical conversations that was very seasonal. I didn't need a full-time person, but just needed someone with a brain to be able to focus on it, 5, 10 hours a week for about a 3-month period of time. I think anyone who's hiring anyone would love to be able to say, here's a project, here's a 3-month project or a 6-month project. Prove to me you can do this well. And if you can do that well, we'll hire you full time. I mean, that's not really how it works very often in the US anymore. You kind of just do a couple interviews and, oh, this person feels good. I like them. So you hire them and then, you have to fire them 6 months later because they can't do the job. So I think that was one of the things that might be a principle to take is if you are bringing in a family member, like they gotta want it. Like, we talk about like humble, hungry, smart, I think is something that Patrick Lencioni says. And so, I was working my 40-hour a week job. And so my initial aspect of being in classical conversations was I was taking on another 10 hours a week where I wasn't doing what I wanted to do, but I was, working the second job and getting paid for it, in the evenings and on the weekends to keep this auxiliary product going. So not everybody has something that they can do that in, but if there is a way, again, if you're trying to see if they're hungry, do they want this? Do they actually want this job, or are they just doing it because they need a paycheck? Especially it's like, all right, start giving them 10 hours worth of work, pay them for it. Like they're paying me, not what I was making at my other job, but a decent amount of money for it. And as an opportunity to learn. So proving myself there, I think was important. And then, as that was going well, we just kept, having conversations about, hey, your brothers are getting older. I'd like to spend some time with them. Do you think, are you willing to come work, full time for us? And, at that time, I'm a pretty loyal person. I was wanting to finish up this project. I said, not quite ready yet, but I'm willing to, keep working, 10 hours a week on top to try to help you in some other areas. And then let me get this project done. Let us get through the busy season. And then I'll put in my 2 weeks notice and figure out how to get back to North Carolina to, start kind of this transition. So we were both probably really naive back then. We're probably still naive now, 12 years later. But yeah, I think we've learned a lot during that time.
Hungry, humble, and smart.
Mm.
That's a good combination of characteristics to look for your potential successor. And so your mom has multiple children. You're the oldest, but you're also the CEO. What is your opinion on taking care of the family from a succession standpoint, but being fair versus maybe not equal parts, right? So maybe talk to us a little bit about
Yeah.
how your mom went ahead and looked at how did she structure her equity in the company? Did everybody get equal parts, or is it based upon seniority
Yeah.
or rank? Talk to us about that concept because it's another thing that a lot of family businesses struggle with.
Yeah. I mean, I think it is something that people struggle with. So how how we did it, and my parents have been very generous. Like they created a trust and put a percent of the company in it way earlier than most founders would do it. Which, now that I've been able to grow the business, that's, now worth a lot more money, and so now it's saved us a lot of tax dollars, when they've passed, so it's gonna turn out pretty well financially for all of us and wanting to pass it on, to the next generation. I think the hard part with anything is you don't wanna create an entitlement mindset for the next generation. You wanna be able to put in guardrails, and you wanna keep them on that family mission. So what my parents did, they put a portion of the business, a minority share, into a trust, and it's equally apportioned to all of us. And so that's how that worked. Now I, as CEO, was given the opportunity to purchase another share, if you would, that's equal to my share in the trust. So I basically now have, twice as much as each of my brothers have, as well as that salary that's, probably a little bit underpaid for my role, but it's fine. Um, the, uh, I always tell them, like, "Don't make me quit, I'll go make more money somewhere else." They probably work me a little harder than I work now, because we got everything running pretty smoothly. So that's kinda how that works. If everything continues on the way, those siblings are well taken care of for that. With the rest of the business, I'm not quite sure how they've proportioned it upon their death. We are in the process of giving myself as CEO the maximum, or the majority of voting shares. So I still have to get one of my brothers to approve what I do, but all three of them would have to go against me in order to do anything. So we've tried to put some checks and balances in there. One of my younger brothers, he owns a construction company, so he doesn't want to work in the business. I did have one brother come and work for a year or so. We kind of felt that wasn't working out and that he needed more experience. So he's gotten another job since then, and hopefully, I'm sure he'll come back and work for the business again. He was just not great timing for him in his life, and he's killing it now at his new job. So that's been a good transition for him. And then my youngest brother is in the military, and I'm not sure what he's going to want to do one day, if he's gonna wanna work for the organization or do something else. And then even my own kids out, my 11, 9, and my 5-year-old, my 9-year-old's looking forward to running CC one day. And so you gotta do a few more things, buddy, before confident that you'll be the one. And maybe it's one of my siblings' children that wanna run it one day. But I think this idea of, family wealth is important. The Bible tells us that a good father is going to leave an inheritance to their kids, and it's not necessarily a financial one. You can leave a spiritual inheritance is going to be much more important than a financial one. But this idea of creating family dynasties and being intentional about your family's North Star, and where you're going and what your core values are, and all these things that we see that are good principles in business, are also good principles in families. And like ultimately, as my mom says, I'm going to die and you guys are going to do whatever you want. But there's, that kind of aspect to it as well, where, you have this one chance of instilling these values into the next generation. And like, are you being intentional about it? We do a family meeting once a year where each of us, we spend about 4 hours, spend an hour or so on the business. We spend an hour or so talking through, a subject, like we've been talking about AI and stuff over the last couple years. And then each of the siblings kind of presents what's going on in their life or with their businesses as well. And so, intentionally kind of having a family board meeting on an annual basis, so they can know how the business is doing, as well as hearing about what each other's doing in a work perspective is something that seems to be working for us.
That's awesome. And so clearly, your parents took the route that being fair does not necessarily mean being equal, and that there is a maybe a little bit more of a hierarchy, or of a compensation structure packages that make more sense because of the level of involvement in the businesses. Through that whole process of planning for how the structure of this business and now a trust that owns the minority shares and that's getting like what kind of did you guys have an advisory board that went on? I know you said that you're part of C12, but like was there another family advisory team members like wealth advisors, attorneys, like was there anybody else
Oh
involved?
yeah. Yeah, so we talked to a bunch of different wealth advisors, a bunch of different attorneys. Even now, like I go back and read the trusts, I'm like, okay, that's not really what we wanted. We really wanted this. Like so much of that is hard to, you just don't have the experience. Like no one has passed on a business before, done that generational planning. Can't remember any of the books off the top of my head, but there's different books and articles that talk about these different ideas. Being part of that C12 group, there was two businesses that had successfully um, transferred over ownership to the next generation in my group, which is unique. And then there was one kind of at the beginning processes of it as well. And so, I was able to talk to them as well, like what worked, what didn't work. What did you find fair? What did you didn't find fair? But I think like, look at the Walton family. Like, as soon as their patriarch died, they all sued each other. They're all billionaires suing each other to get a few extra $100 million, right? So clearly, like, it doesn't matter how rich you make your next generation. Like, if you don't instill good values, if you don't have a family North Star, like, they're all just going to tear down everything you built. So, that's one of the things that, like, right now I'm very concerned about, not necessarily with classical conversations, but just like I look at like places like Yale and Harvard, and they just have this rich Christian tradition that they were founded upon, and now they're bastions of atheism. And whether you're religious or not, or care about those things or not, their founders had a very intentional direction. You can go walk around their campuses and just see all the imagery, the language, all the things they did to say, this is the direction we're going in. And now they're going in an opposite direction. And you could be thrilled with that or not. But like as a business owner, the reality is you can do all the right things. And I mean, the market turns against you, right? And so I think it's better to pass on those values. And that's why I think, so many of the ones that do it successfully force their kids to go work for other people before allowing them to come inside the business. And I'm not talking about like the 15-year-old sweeping the floors or packing boxes, right? I'm talking about you going and getting a degree or going to get credentialed or going into the workforce and spending 2, 3, 4 years or more, proving yourself, learning from others, getting a different perspective so that you can bring that back into the business. And then I think trying to lay out that plan and like just, I mean, it's hard to do, but like a good business, you're going to lay out goals for your employees, whether it's quarterly goals or annual goals and expectations. And you're going to do that for your business, right? Hey, we want to make X amount of money this year. We need to sell this many gadgets. We need to do this many showings, so you plan all that out and then you decide whether you hit it or not. I mean, you've got to have those same disciplines, with that next generation. One, because those are good disciplines to have. And two, you love them, right? You got to figure out good ways to take the emotions out of it. And so if you hire little Jimmy to sell, and he's worked for the company for 2 years and hasn't sold anything, your other salespeople are going to start getting kind of upset, and they're definitely not going to think that little Jimmy should ever run the company,
Yeah.
or at least they're not going to be sticking around if he does. So I think that's where you can be fair with, hey, you're an owner, but look, you haven't accomplished the things that need to be accomplished to have the final say in these areas. Of course, we'd love to hear your feedback and things like that. And then I think, we don't have this yet, but I think trying to, we're working on not with any sort of speed or anything, but having some sort of outside, board of directors that have some veto power or insight that can help the business take some of that emotion out of it in the future, and get their advice is something that we're looking at doing.
That's awesome. So moving in another direction, but taking the business to another level, looking to bring in as many advisors as possible. And it sounds like during your whole your organization process or this planning process, you spoke to a ton of people, both professional and other peers that were going through the same or had gone through that same process and transition, and you guys were kind of listening and taking advice from a lot of different key people during that time.
Yeah, it's interesting because it was actually like 2013 when we started this process. We got a wealth advisor who kind of came up with a family plan, and then that kind of basically just sat on the shelf for about 4 or 5 years. It was a good plan, but the business was growing a lot, and so we found another advisor, and then we entered like 3 or 4 wealth advisors, talked to a couple different lawyers, and then, like I said, probably talked to 3 or 4 businesses, and just tried to synthesize all that all that information and try to make the best calls that we could possibly make at the time.
And what was some of the best pieces of information or advice that each of those, the wealth manager and attorney and some of your peers, what were some of that best pieces of wisdom that they were able to give you?
Well, I think one of the things that you need to think about is that entitlement mindset. And so we didn't necessarily incorporate all these ideas into our specific, our first iteration of the plan that we've implemented. But if you're an owner or if you work for the company, like, you're only going to get paid for, what market rate is. So if we pay $70,000 for this job, that's what you're going to get paid from like a trust standpoint, putting things in there like, hey, you have to work at least 500 hours a year to be eligible to have distributions so that, they're not just sitting around the couch and getting distributions from your work and watching Netflix and playing video games all day. They actually have to, remain somewhat gainfully employed or something like that. I've seen like things where like your daughter's passion is to be a teacher. Well, a teacher's only going to make, 40, 50,000. They're not making a whole lot of money as a teacher, but they're passionate about that. So the trust will distribute dollar for dollar, the first $50,000 a year that you make. So that way they actually have to go find a job and be someone who's benefiting society before they can, draw from their trust. So just things like that where you want to empower them to be able to take some maybe non-lucrative career roles without kind of allowing them to just kind of be an entitled generation that spends it on hookers and booze.
Roger that. So, okay, that's awesome. So, planning process very well thought out. Had a plan, very methodical. You got advice from a lot of different people, very professional and peers. And then so now you've gone through this plan, and you said your transition period was about 2 to 3 years of your mother slowly letting go. Walk us through what that process looked like. I think you touched on it earlier a little bit, but maybe to a little bit more detail of, you had the first 90-day project, and then you started to do what? Like, what did she start offloading? And then was there grading criteria in there as far as when you were ready for the next thing? Like, talk to us about that whole process of going from just, new to the company as an executive, but then taking over the full reins.
Yeah, I mean, again, I'll probably be a little bit more technical with whatever the next generation looks like or next person. But yeah, I mean, I think part of it was so the first thing I did was work on marketing in that department and creating a plan, executing that plan. The next thing I did was work with the warehouse staff and the operations of shipping books out and doing that. We were in the process of a website redesign. So then I led that project and all the time, like on a monthly basis, we'd sit down with the P&L and go through the P&L kind of line by line. What does this mean? What is this telling us? And then so I would start budgeting, and then reviewing how we were doing versus our budget. And then, with customer service, that was the next part. And then I've never touched the curriculum, just so everyone knows. She still helps out with that. She always kind of babied that, and we have 2 wonderful ladies that run the day-to-day operations there, and she's not doing too much over there anymore either. But yeah, so it was just kind of what made sense. We were needing to go in another directions. We had to get a new accounting software, which can cripple your business if you don't do that right. There's projects that were going along, and so I would kind of take these projects, and then once the new systems were implemented, start taking over the management or of that portion. And so, I mean, when I came on board, we were about 40 employees. We were growing 20-30% a year. So, I mean, a lot of it was just hang on, and trying to keep up with hiring practices and things like that along the way. So, I don't know that there was like intentional, like we're gonna do this, department first and then this department and this department, but really just, you know, don't throw 10 things at them once, basically like we're gonna do it together one time, then you're gonna do it alone, and I'm gonna check you one time, and then you're gonna do it by yourself, and I'm gonna check you once a year, type idea. And so, obviously, if you don't get it right the first time, maybe you stay at one of those steps for multiple times. But that's kind of what you would do to anyone who's onboarding into a new role. If you have the capacity to do that, is hopefully, you don't just say, "Hey, figure it out." You have kind of like an onboarding process and idea of, okay, I'm going to show you how to close the books for the month. I'm going to show you how to, do that with me 2 or 3 times. Okay, now I'm gonna let you do it, but I'm gonna check you afterwards separately. Okay, you've done that a couple of times, and now, all right, I'm just gonna let you close the books by yourself. So I think that's important. I think following the money, that's gonna be another big thing is understanding how the economics of the business really work. Because a lot of times, I mean, like, think about McDonald's, like, probably the average person thinks that they're a burger company or a fry company, but really they're just a real estate company. And how do they afford real estate? Well, they sell burgers and fries out of these pieces of land that they own. And so, a naive person might come in thinking, "Oh, I need to make better burgers or better French fries." When reality, I imagine the CEO of McDonald's tries to get a really good development and team that can predict where traffic's going to come a few years from now, and then they buy real estate there and put up their building and make a bunch of money. So, making sure that the next generation understands the true economics behind your business is going to be important as well.
That's super powerful. Very powerful stuff there. And I think 100% right, 100% accurate. You said that your process was a little less structured and it was more just kind of addressing the needs of the day and the projects that came up more or less, but that you would, if your next handoff is going to be much different, explain to us what you would do differently and what are you going to put in place?
Yeah, I mean, I think that concept is a good one, but there wasn't necessarily as many like gates and checks and balances and very clear criteria for what success looked like, and what it didn't look like. And so, just trying to be more specific with that information. One of the things that they have you do at UPS when you're in their management company is go work in different departments for a period of time as you're climbing their corporate ladder. At least that's how they did it 20 years ago. And so, I think I kind of did that in a way, but not as drastically as like intentionally as they would do that. So making sure that they're maybe a department head in a couple of different areas before coming on, so that they can see the full, make decisions for the business in different areas where they're not necessarily experts at, but you can still follow those processes are going to be important. One of the things that we do now at Classical Conversations is we basically kind of have a business management book each quarter that we read with our senior leaders. So that's something that is already established that I didn't necessarily have, but helping to understand like this is how we do business. This is why we do business this way. These are the best thought leaders on this. This is how we kind of look at this through our Christian worldview and our lens of being abortans and our family's core values. All of those things are going to be important to do. So yeah, I don't know that it would be necessarily much different, other than it's more of like a get it done. Oh, you got it done. Great. All right, you can be in charge of that versus there wasn't a lot of necessarily standards that were were set for accuracy or anything like that.
So,
So, I mean, it worked out.
just being a little bit more intentional with the process and gauging success, failure, pass, fail, or making sure that there's set criterias would really help maybe the next
Yeah.
generation.
Yeah, and I think having the buy-in with the senior leaders, especially if, we're a family business, so it wasn't like the senior leaders were expecting to be CEO one day, necessarily, but, making sure that, their concerns are addressed, if they have any, especially if they're, vetted by me and they've been with us for a while and they're trusted and respected, that they earn that individual's trust and respect as well is gonna be important. Unless you want that person to quit, then you don't need to do that. Yeah, and I think getting involved, especially if it's like a 3rd generation person, whether it's, one of my children or sibling's child, is just trying to make sure that they're, like I said, that humble, hungry, and smart idea that they embrace those tenets and are showing that in what they're doing.
Yeah, it's super hard to get to a third. It's even really hard to get to a fourth. I mean, the numbers get worse and worse every generation of percentage likelihood of success. I think it's 1 out of 10 go to a third generation. And it's 1 out of 3% or 4% make it to a fourth. So
Yeah.
the intentionality behind the handoff, I think, is super important. And I know we're running up against the clock here a little bit, but the talk to us a little bit about what were some of the things that you saw that your mom struggled with through this transition, and what were some of the things that you struggled with that other people need to probably would be served to know ahead of time of being prepared to handle those obstacles?
Well, yeah. Well, I think from like my mom's perspective and from any like founders, you just have this founders syndrome. The business is your baby. You've taken it from cradle to where it is now. So like all of those emotions and ideas, especially like there's a whole lot of, I don't care if this works or our customers, care about this, but this is how I want it done type stuff. Like, my way or the highway, especially, I mean, that's what you need in a founder. Absolutely. It's gonna be very hard to be a good founder if you're not, this is what we're doing. We're taking the hill. We're going right up the center. Like, from hell or high water, this is how we're doing it. Right. And then, but that's what you need at that development. But then when you kind of you get to the top of the hill or, you're more in a stable mindset, you kind of need to start being more managing and delegating. Otherwise, you're going to be working 100 hours a week just because you have so many, things that you're trying to control and micromanage. So she did a really good job at hiring people that were passionate about classical conversations. So I mean, probably like 90% of our employees when I came on board were customers of ours. I think still about probably 70% customers of ours. So they had very good, they had very good directional alignment with where the organization was going, but they didn't necessarily always had that skill set necessarily of is a lot like, hey, I need help with this. Will you help me with this? You know, I always joked when I came on board, there was 30 employees and 5 of them were C-level executives, 'cause she was just giving out titles to everyone, and then it's like, "Okay, this isn't like, this is probably not the most healthy way to," you might wanna have, like, 2 C-level executives at that point, not 5. And so trying to put in like more intentional like hiring practices. Like for most people, right, we hate annual reviews and like as a business owner, if you made enough money that year, you skip it or don't give feedback to your employees in that manner. So like I implemented quarterly feedback so we could get feedback more often to our team members and things like that. She's, I think being intimately involved with the product for, 30 years from homeschooling, us and being a leader in the organization to kind of, another generation is coming and, there's historical truths that do not change, but then there are timely things that do change. And so I think that's always something that's difficult for, if this is what's worked for 30 years. Well, yeah, it worked for 30 years because you were also living it out day to day for 30 years versus now you haven't lived it out on a day to day basis with anyone for 10 years. And there's just like, things have changed. So I think that's always hard for any founder as well. And, so those are maybe some blind spots. I've always tried to take the approach that if we disagree on something, she's probably right unless I can prove to myself that I'm right. And so just trying to take kind of that humble idea, but sometimes I've made incorrect decisions or I didn't really understand maybe some of the philosophy behind some of the decisions she made. And so I made different decisions. And then through conversations, like, oh, I thought you didn't want to do X because of Y. No, it's actually because of ABC. Well, that makes sense. I probably shouldn't have done that, but like I thought I didn't quite cast that vision. In business, it's kind of like parenting. You need to have a very few rules and repeat them often. And so I think, if as you kind of get farther and farther from the business, the more you back out of it, you're getting less and less, kind of in tune with maybe what those rules are or being able to repeat them as often. So, as we've grown and we've had different turnover and, different disagreements, you know, one of the things that I've always asked is like, okay, like, how are you teaching? How are you going to teach someone else this ideology or this thought process that you have if you're not going to spend a lot of intimate time with them? And so, like, one of the things I've encouraged her to do is like, okay, you got to come up with, I don't know, 10 rules, like, for creating curriculum. Like, it has to be very simple and easy for people to understand if it's something that you want people to be able to use as a guide rail in the future so that your vision continues beyond your time in the organization. And so yeah, I think for me it'd be easy like to get blindsided of like not understanding the struggle to get to where the business is or not understanding the financial model, trying to do things that might seem like they're not distracting, but really are. I mean, it's always very easy to chase the next shiny object or, let's just compromise here with our core values. It's not illegal, it's just not how we would normally do something. And then that takes you off the path. So I think it's always at least for me, just always trying to understand, like, all right, she's a visionary. I'm more of a, operations person. I have some visionary traits, but, she sees things no one else does. So, like, how do I try to understand what she's seeing so I can try to execute her vision? So, I think that'd be the other thing. And again, it depends on like your business situation. Is it important for your business to keep that same vision or not? Like, I don't know. I mean, think about like what is it, Fiji Films? Like they don't even make films anymore. They do like biochemical something tangential, but right, the film industry just went away. So they were probably a publicly traded company or something. But if they had been another generation and their owners had just said, "No, we're going to double down on film," when no one's buying film, like that would have been, disastrous for the organization instead of saying, what is our company's core values? What are the competencies we have? Oh, we're good with chemicals. Is there a way for us to use these facilities and this, chemical knowledge that we have to support some sort of different industry? And so they were able to, go in a different direction and still have a very successful business as far as I'm aware. Yeah, yeah, doing something, most people think Fuji films are bankrupted or don't exist anymore. Well, they're just a B2B company in the chemical space now. And unless you're, one of their 10 buyers, you probably have no reason to think any otherwise. But, used to see them every single day in Walmart, or Kmart. Yeah, Kmart
Yeah.
doesn't exist anymore either. So knowing what are those core principles, what are those guardrails, and then is the next generation just going to try to milk the business? Are they going to fly it into the ground, or at what point are you just going to kind of wipe your hands of it and say either God's going to tell you when you don't get to make any more decisions, or you can try to do that and I mean, I don't know. I've been involved in like a lot of nonprofits work where I've been president or chairman of the board and take it to some direction, and then you try to give it to someone else and teach them to do all the same things, but if they either listen or they don't, and there's really nothing you can do about it. So I've seen both and seen things go in both directions. I mean, at some point, you just have to be at peace with what happens, and while you're a steward of it, do the best you can. But come to kind of that point where, and we're getting to this here in the next 2 years, of like, okay, I am no longer steward of this. I am giving it, giving it to you, or giving you the voting shares, or you're buying the voting shares, or buying it off me. And so, yeah, kind of good luck. Please don't make me regret this. But at that point, there's nothing you can do about it. So
Yeah, everybody exits at some point. Either some people just choose to do it standing up, and I think that's it's great wisdom that everybody needs to remember. Learning how to let go is super hard, but it's super important. What is something I wanted two more questions before we kind of wrap up, but one question is what about this whole process went really well? It was a great experience. What part of this transition was like that for you guys?
yeah, I mean, I'd heard when I started this, the two of the companies I talked to kind of had some horror stories. So overall, I think it went pretty smooth. I think it was again a shared vision for where we wanted to go, and then just kind of mutual respect. And then in many ways, I think my mom probably deferred to my final decision, probably more than she would have liked to. But since I was running the operations, there's only so much she could do without coming in fully. And then she was also, uh, you know, like I mentioned or alluded to earlier, she had another thing she was involved in, which was finishing raising up my two younger brothers. After that, again, she kind of tried to step back into the business more. That kind of thought we had gotten through this transition already, and had to kind of re-go through that in a little bit, uh, to try to that was not one of the smooth things, but I think just like a mutual respect, me trying to take the view of, she is owner. That is, as an employee, my responsibility is to understand the owner's intent and try to execute that. So even though I'm the CEO, that I'm not necessarily the one who gets to make every single decision. I think that was important. And then she was again still involved, through that process of, you know, kind of getting together every 6 months or so to review the financials and talk about what's going on, and trying to do that intentionally.
That's awesome. Being very intentional with that handoff, it sounds like it went really well. And so kind of as we kind of close this segment, I want you to speak directly to the audience here and like give them some if you had to boil down everything to a first principle, like 1 to 3 principles max, right? But really down to first principles of succession planning and execution. What would be your 1, 2, 3?
Yeah. I mean, I think the first thing is to have a plan. So many people just don't even create wills because they're afraid of thinking about that next stage of life. And so, I think, what is your goal? You know, to have $5 million, $10 million, $1 million, 500,000, or what is that? What is your goal? Is it to have that second generation run it? Is it to have them? You have to articulate it. You have to write it down, and you have to get those principles down. Because if you don't know where you're going, you're definitely getting there. So I'd say that's kind of that first principle. The second one is, and Bill High talks about this, is having a 7 generation outlook. So if you're if you're thinking, how is this organization going to last 7 generations? And you mentioned earlier, like hardly any last 3 generations, barely any last 4 generations. Well, part of that is a lot of people probably didn't think about, what are the things that we're going to do as a family so that we do last. Because as long as we're having kids, our generations are going to continue. And I do have some responsibility. They don't have to listen to me. There's nothing I can do to do it, but making sure that they understand the family story, and stories are so powerful. So making sure I have a plan, I would have those core values, and then I would have that family story so that they understand like where the family came from. I know my grandparents came over after World War II. They owned a hotel in Latvia. The Russians came and took it from them, and then the Germans came and took them, and then they finally got to the US. And there's a lot of principles to be learned there. My wife's grandfather was a Jew in Germany. And when Hitler came in power, he said, you've got 2 weeks to leave. Otherwise, you got to stay. So his family decided to be one of the ones that left. And a lot of people didn't make that same decision. Just sharing these, stories with our family. On my mom's side, the family had a lot of family wealth. And then I had a great great grandfather who retired at the age of 20 and left his children with nothing. And so, he wasn't thinking about 7 generations from now. He was thinking about 7 minutes from now, and, what he was going to do to fill his belly. So I think being able to have those stories that you share with your family that makes them, proud, or see that they're part of a lineage and they have responsibilities to those who came before them, and those who will come after them is going to be important for that lifelong success of your family.
I love it. First one was have a plan. Second one was know your family core values. And third one was know your family history. That's awesome. So, with that, Robert, tell everybody where they can find you.
Yeah. You can find me, yeah. So Classical Conversations is our main business, classicalconversations.com. We're helping people homeschool in over 60 countries, almost 30 years in business, tens of thousands of graduates, millions of people who've been through it, satisfied customers. You can find me on X, the Robert B Show. That's my main place where I communicate, talk a lot about family, continuing your legacy, obviously homeschooling and classical education. You can find me on LinkedIn or Facebook as well. And of course, Classical Conversations is on all the socials as well. We'd love to have you in our community. If you want to intentionally raise the next generation of leaders in your family so that they can live your legacy and pass it on to your grandchildren and great grandchildren. So classicalconversations.com. And I've also got a book coming out in January called Woke and Weaponized: How Karl Marx Won the Battle for American Education and How We Can Win It Back. And it just goes through the history of education in the United States and why, as parents, we got to be more intentional because there are sinister forces afoot that have a plan for your kids. And it's probably much more thorough than the plan that you've already established. This is a generational battle, and we got to be ready to fight it. So you can go to wokeandweaponized.com, and that will take you to the landing page, and that will be available in January.
Amazing. I love it. And we'll have links for all of that, all of his places where we could find Robert Classical Conversations, and his book will be in the description below. So please check him out. Robert, thank you so much for your time, your wisdom, and again, happy birthday.
Thanks. Thanks. As I was saying off camera, the older you get, you've already hit all these milestones. So you might as well just get to work.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.